Michael, it's great. It's really great having you here. It's actually great having you with us in this field. Do you remember when and where we met the first time?
I do remember how we met. So first of all, thank you to Risa and Nir for having me for this. It's really great to chat and actually see a bunch of old friends on the call as well. We met because I was speaking with Michael Hayden, who was head of R&D at Teva at the time. As would frequently happen when we got to kind of more personal conversation, I would spout off around my interest in longevity, because I can talk a little bit about my history in the space, but long time interest in the space. And I mentioned your work to him, and he said, "Well, why don't you just go talk to Nir?" And I said, "Well, that's probably a good idea." So following up on that, I sent you a note, and we went and we had lunch out near Einstein. That was the first time we met in person.
So what I remember, and I'm 67 years old, maybe my memory is not thing, but I remember that at one point you showed so much commitment and enthusiasm in longevity, and you were just thinking, we just have to move ahead. And you said something like, if I can help by being a technician in your lab, I would do that. Do you remember that? And
I still feel that way. I just, to me, this is like, it's the most interesting scientific question. It's the most valuable scientific question. And there's so much for us to do that it's just mission focused, right? Let's all working together, see how we can progress against this. It's the kind of thing where, I mean, I know for me personally, but I also think a lot of people, it really, it grabs you, it's so interesting. And so fundamentally important that, I think it can be kind of all consuming, right? And so I'm envious of the folks like you that are, have really lived it in the lab.
So I have to tell you, when I heard that, I was thinking to myself, neither you nor should I be technician in my lab. And we are going to demonstrate now that you have actually a better role to play than, a more important role to play. Everything is important, but you have a talent that can help the field more. And so this time we want to focus mainly on how we get to pharmaceuticals, how can we get pharmaceuticals to come to us, and kind of have a way around that. But before we start, tell us what we need to know about you, okay? And remember, you're too great to be humble, so just tell us what we need to know. Where did you get those expertise and insight and wisdom?
Well, so my day job, right? So I've worked for 24 years at BCG. I'm a managing director, senior partner. BCG, I think most people know, Boston Consulting Group. It's a between 10 and $15 billion turnover consulting firm. I lead our growth and innovation topic globally, and I focus on analytics within that. I'm a biologist by training. I did my undergrad at Princeton and graduate at Imperial. And I think relevant here is just my, very long-standing interest in lifespan, health span, pathways of aging. I actually knew about caloric restriction in the 70s. My dad knew about it, and I don't know how, but I thought that was just super cool, right? There's this known intervention where you could live longer, live healthier. That's, already, fantastic, right? And then I was working on diapause in the 90s when Cynthia Kenyon's paper came out, and it was our first indication that we understood, some of the pathways involved, and started really following the field since then. So I keep a list of all the papers I read. So 900 papers in the field. I feel like I'm pretty knowledgeable, but of course there's never quite the same, if you're reading it versus if you're doing the work, right? And then most recently, I mean, you would know this, and Jerry's on as well, which is great to see. I joined. I did something very unusual, which is I went down to part-time at BCG. I joined Life Biosciences in a part-time role as head of business development, where my first job actually was to hire on, some full-time staff. And then once I did that, I went down to just advisory capacity, where I still have a relationship, which I should disclose, advisory relationship with Life.
Terrific. So you started talking about how we made great strides. I would say in the research, we went from hope to promise. And this promise we need to start realizing. We know that we talk like that. What is the pharmaceutical perspective?
So I think, so people in pharma are just people, right? Like the rest of us. So I think at a very fundamental level, some of the reasons are similar, right? Which is just the real interest in human health and human lifespan, and the opportunity this presents, right? I mean, I think we sort of get spoiled and underestimate just how unbelievable valuable life is. Like, you take the very big picture view, right, and you scope out the whole universe. 70% of the universe is just dark energy, right? And then of the remainder, 80-90% of what's left is just dark matter. Like a very tiny bit of the whole universe is even matter, right? What we would call normal matter, 4 or 5%, and almost all of that is just hydrogen and helium. And so you're down to like 1 part in 1,000 that's even an element on the periodic table above helium. A lump of coal is actually incredibly rare and special in the universe. And to go from that then to life, and then intelligent life, no one knows the solution to the Drake equation, but there might be 1 in 100 million or 1 in 100 billion intelligent per star intelligent species. And so like we're this incredible speck of this super rare and special and incredibly valuable thing. And so anything we can do to extend that and improve the quality of that is just super valuable. And I think that motivates people at a human level, whether you're in pharma, whether you're in anything, right? Whatever you do. And of course, pharma as an industry, their job, right, is to extend human health. And to the extent that there are new ways to do that, it can be valuable. Now, where the gap is, we've not yet proven it out, right? So there's lots of indication that the pathways of biology that we think about when we think about the aging pathways can have an effect on human health span. But of course, we've not yet gotten to clinical proof on that.
So first of all, I wasn't sure by your space comments if you're a creationist or evolutionist, but okay. So pharmaceutical have an interest. Do they have any interest in lifespan, in health span? What would be our approach to that? Because at the end, what we need is the prevention part of aging, right? We want to intervene aging in order to stop diseases, and they basically want to treat diseases. How do we? How could we get them?
I would refine what you said. They're perfectly interested in prevention of disease as well. Hey, David.
Hey, David, congratulations, and put yourself on mute for a while.
Look,
hi, Michael.
Hey, David, nice to see you. So lifespan per se, personally, I believe is important, as well as health span per se. But as we all know, and I think pretty much everyone on this call has thought through, a number of times, right? Lifespan per se is not an indication, not an provable disease by a regulatory authority. That doesn't matter, right? Because the pathways of aging, the thesis is you can, the number one risk factor for most chronic diseases of interest, whether it's neurodegeneration, whether it's cancer, whether it's diabetes, obesity, et cetera, right? They all go up, exponentially with age. The number one risk factor we know is age. And if you can decouple biological age from chronological age, you create, a potential intervention that can hit multiple diseases. And that's approvable, right? An intervention that either prevents or modulates the rate of progression of a disease absolutely is something that you can approve as a therapy. And by the way, if you buy the thesis that these pathways affect multiple diseases, it's actually a pipeline and a pill, which is kind of the holy grail for a pharma, right? The ability to say, I've got one medication and I can get approvals for lots of different diseases and have meaningful patient impact in a lot of different diseases is super interesting. And so there is a path here to focus on health span, focus on diseases that validates out the aging biology. And then, maybe somewhere down the road, we can start to think about lifespan per se as well.
So TAME is really designed to prove a concept, right? That's why it's designed. But I want to tell you something interesting about TAME. TAME is about cardiovascular, cancer, cognitive endpoint, and mortality. In other words, the FDA has agreed for mortality being one of the measurements. That's apropos lifespan and health span. It could be coupled in the regulatory permissions kind of that we have. Okay, so if we understand pharmacies, what does it mean where Longevity Biotech Association is concerned, or longevity biotechs are concerned? How should we focus in a way that pharmaceuticals will be intrigued and convert?
Yeah, so as I just said, right, so lifespan's not an indication. Individual diseases are. There are actually also approvals across diseases for a pathway-driven approach. We saw that first in immunotherapy for cancer, where you got an approval for multiple cancer indications. So you're going after disease approvals. The development path is therefore clear, right? Take some of these therapeutics as if you're an individual company, right, and proceed forward, get into clinic, and get eventually to proof of concept. That becomes, once you've got clinical proof of concept, it becomes very valuable to pharma, right? They've got a de-risked asset. The biological thesis has been proven out. Now it's about the ability to run clinical trials in a way that is efficient and large enough sample to be able to show to a regulator that things work, and then of course to get it into the hands of patients. Pharma is really good at that. So from an individual company's perspective of a member of the LBA, it's all about getting to proof of concept or POC, and then the deal making that can come after that, or in some cases you can obviously develop the therapy on your own. For the LBA as a group, I think there is this importance of what I'd call marketing, right? Making sure there's awareness of the thesis in this area, of the growing weight of interest. But of course, most pharma companies are they've got their ear to the ground, so they're aware of the activity. There's been a tremendous upswing with things like the Evolution Foundation, with the large investment that happened at Altos and a decade now ago at Calico. Groups like the Buck Institute, the Ericsson as well, right? There's tremendous amount of activity that's going on now, and pharma is aware of that.
Yeah, another thing that's going on, there's the new creation of the Healthy Longevity Medicine Society to train already longevity doctors to receive the drugs, and there are plenty things to do to maximize your health anyhow. So yeah, the wave is interesting. So we're kind of rewriting our vision statement. What would be a vision statement that will be good for both LBA and pharma? How can we, how can we share a vision statement?
I think you can encapsulate the thesis pretty simply. It's using the pathways of aging biology to make a meaningful impact for patients across a range of diseases. And by the way, extend lifespan as well.
Oh, right. So what do you think needs to fall in place now for us to make a much more rapid advance? Do we need the different animal models, biomarkers? What are the things that you think are kind of delaying us maybe from a pharmaceutical point of view?
Yeah, so one way to think about this, right? You can conceptualize it. There's what you call a value chain, right? A series of steps that happen to bring, start from idea and end up with therapy. And this way of conceptualizing it is useful, although can be constraining as well, because if you look at the history of how therapies were actually developed, it's all over the map in terms of it didn't follow this kind of linear sequence. But a basic way to think about it is, understand the biology. Then you've got some preclinical models that help you iterate quickly on, okay, is this thesis actually working out? And then you go into clinic, and you need to be able to identify the right patients and measure their response with some good biomarkers. We've got gaps all along the way, right? And so there is activity that you can do across that range. We know a lot around the biology, but of course, that's probably the most important piece. And so there's still plenty more to do there. The next step of that, there's actually a huge gap, which you mentioned, even in your question around models. We really have very poor predictive models for what's going to happen in humans in the clinic. And it's not, we do the best we can with what we have, but that's a gap that should be continued focus to fix. The ability to predict what's going to happen in a neurodegenerative disease, from the models we have right now, particularly bad, but really across the board, across diseases. And then when you get into clinic, we still don't have good biomarkers, right, for many diseases to understand quickly, are we modulating the disease or not? And so you have to wait again for some of these chronic diseases. They take a while to progress, and we have poor measures, and so you get a lot of noise. And of course, that makes it hard to know whether is something working or not. So biomarkers is another big gap, and that's just on the disease front. I mean, you can layer on top of that. Okay, well, what is aging? How do you measure aging? Right? Are the methylation clocks are they going to be predictive when we actually start to think about interventions? Maybe, right? It seems like they might be tying into some fundamental underlying biology, and so maybe so. But of course, we don't know that yet.
Yeah, so, one thing that we've advanced as the scientists advance in the modeling is we call the attention to the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, that are not for health, they're for disease. But we call their attention that a lot of their scientists are using 2 to 4 month old mice to understand cardiovascular disease. Even the Alzheimer models are very young. And there are institutes that are giving $100,000 supplement for investigators to actually use the right platform. That is the platform where biology of aging have occurred, because we think this led to a lot of failure. And by the way, in AFAR, we have a really great initiative to take studies on gerotherapeutics that have been completed and look at omics biomarkers and try to do it fast and in advance. But
we have a paper coming out. So we did a retrospective analysis. We did a case control study. Cases are diseases for which we've made progress, and controls are diseases for which we're still stymied. And we just asked, well, what's different between those? And using actually some of the framework that I was just describing around, what are the conditions that need to fall in place around, being able to, measure response, identify patients, understand the biological targets, et cetera. And what we found in that study is that half the time, fully half the time, the thing that fell into place last that made progress possible was actually the development of a good model. And there's lots of great anecdotal examples. In our recent lifetime, we've effectively cured hepatitis C, 90% cure rates from what was a chronic disease that ultimately led to cirrhosis and death in a lot of patients. A lot of the conditions for that were in place for years and years, right back to the 80s was when we could first identify patients, knew and measure response. And it wasn't until it was called the Replicon mouse. So it was a model where you could actually grow and HCV and then iterate treatments on that. A company called Pharma did the screens that the year after, I think, the Replicon mouse was created. They did the screens that led to the drugs that we now have on market for Hep C. And that's it's in a one anecdotal example, but what we found is that's actually a general pattern that having a good model system in place can often be an unlock to help you make progress. And yet we're not investing heavily in that. It's a real gap for the industry to invest better in model systems.
Yeah, but again, I want to defend the aging model itself, and to say that we took all the models that exhibit longevity in aging animals and looked at the pathways that are used for people who get to 100 years old, longevity in humans. And it's the top are the same pathway, the mTOR, the IGF. So I think we are actually having good model that is underused. But I totally agree that the Hep C is a wonderful example. We need a good model for that. So, okay. So what could be our role of the LBA to approach pharma? What can we do to help spread the gospels and get them engaged?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll make the analogy to the kind of commercial, model of any company, right? There's marketing and then there's sales. I think sales is left to the individual members of the LBA, right? Which is, I'm speaking by analogy. I don't actually mean a sale, but I mean, the individual deal making and collaboration with pharma that can progress, therapies into the clinic and ultimately the patients. I think where LBA as an entity can be useful is sort of the analogy on marketing, right? Which is how do you create awareness, get the message out? There's so much great science that already exists. There's a lot of activity now going on at member companies. Obviously, there's the activity that's happening now in foundations and some investment groups. There's awareness of that at some level, but there is a level of just beating the drum on that and sharing kind of the details of it that I think the LBA as a group can do.
Good. So let me. It's almost half an hour, but there are two issues that our members would be interested to know. And first of all, when we advance, at what stage, when we invest in treatment, in which stage do we start approaching pharma? And second is, who are we approaching at the hierarchy of a pharma? Who are the people that we have to engage? What's your insight for us?
Yeah. Well, there's great people on this call who have lived that on both sides of it. So Joan was on the call, and couple things. So it's always good to talk early, right? There's no harm in starting a conversation. But as I mentioned, I think real interest happens as you get to proof of concept, right? You've got a de-risked asset. It becomes actually very easy to make deals at that point. And in terms of whom, lots of people matter, right? Obviously, the disease biologists in the area in question are great folks to connect with. R&D leadership, even folks on the commercial side. So, lab to lab conversations are actually really powerful, and you want to, try and have parallel conversations at multiple levels of the hierarchy. And of course, every pharma company has a group whose job it is to connect with promising biotechs around business development or external innovation. And, you know, obviously connecting with those folks can be a great first point of call.
Well, that's a terrific start, and we're going now to open the discussion and let the members of LBA who are here bug you with specific or other questions. So, guys, you can unmute if you want, and let's start a discussion here. David, you were late, but I know why you were late, because everybody in the world wants to interview you on the new and how you, what I call, melted the ice. Okay. Are you in pajamas sleeping?
No. I'm not sleeping, at least. Yeah, no, I've retreated to a cabin in the hills of California, so I'm not many people can reach me right now. And as you heard, there's not much signal here, so I hope you can still see me. Yeah, I mean, it's been a great discussion, and Michael, thank you for your leadership in this as well. So you're able to look at us from a distance compared to those of us that have been buried in the research and the molecules for so long. So really appreciate that. Yeah, you know, I still think we have a public perception issue. Having been approached by reporters just yesterday and today, there's still a lot of confusion and ignorance about what we're trying to do here. I even had a reporter say, well, we've covered aging. Can you just get back to me when you've cured this in humans? And, you know, I thought, well, gosh, that's a pretty high bar. But I think the more that we can convince investors, of course, but also the general public that what you said, Michael, is the case, which is that we're talking about being able to address multiple diseases with a single medicine that would get on the market for one indication and then be used widely. That's what I've found has resonated the most with this new paper of ours that just came out that Nir, you hinted at. Because I can talk about mice and molecules and epigenetics, and people's eyes tend to glaze over. But when I say, imagine having a single medicine that treats all major diseases, or at least many of them, then they wake up and they say, okay, now I understand why you're doing this.
Yeah, I mean, I like that. I mean, you know, it's interesting. I mean, you also wrote a paper that was, I mean, most of your papers are on, you know, work from your lab, scientific, but you wrote a great one on the economic value with Scott and Allison, which, you know, it was the analogies of Peter Pan and Wolverine, right, where it made it come to life. But it was also just incredibly compelling to an economist to say, look at the value here, right? Just a 10-year life extension, or you know, even 1 year, right? I mean, depending on which example you want to pick, is worth, you know, 300, 400 trillion, you know, with a T, right? There's just a tremendous amount of economic value here in unleashing people's potential. I mean, there was obviously some value of life in that calculation as well, and the economic boom that will come from this. So, you know, probably the least important of all reasons, but even that is just a huge number, right? And so there are ways to, I think, make the argument depending on, you know, which angle you want to, you know, which group you're talking to. But I agree with you that the addressing disease aspect of this is the nearest term one and the most tangible and valuable one that I think is the right way to talk about it.
Joan.
So I think the thing that's going to move big pharma is just really good placebo-controlled data, which we don't have yet. You know, we tried to get RestorBio, but then the phase 3 failed. If we can get just, we're all taking shots on goal, well-powered, really compelling proof of concept data. And we did have a lot of big pharma interested at RestorBio, and they were waiting for the phase 3. So again, I think it's just a matter of generating the data. In terms of marketing, I was reading, I don't remember if it's the MIT Tech Review or New York Times, some description of a aging conference for billionaires in a ski resort in Switzerland. And this is like anti-marketing. And it was these rich people getting on the floor, putting on masks to make themselves hypoxic, no placebo control, anything going on. And I was cringing as a member of the field at this kind of marketing because it's so bad in terms of getting credibility with big pharma. It's rich people craziness instead of data.
Well, Joan, I was in this conference, okay? So I'll tell you what really happened, okay?
Mhm.
And for me, it was very exciting. It was an investor meeting. And there are two groups of investors. There are young investors and older investors. The younger investors are saying, this reminds me of the initial crypto wave. By the way, crypto is not a good word to use these days, but it was like the crypto. We're excited because we know that longevity is the next frontier. We want to be there early. And the others who did the web stuff, and they feel the same. In other words, those people who were interested people, they were not interested in their own health. They
Were they blue chip investors or were they rich investors?
They are rich investors that were looking at opportunity to invest in longevity. A lot of them were following up with me. So yeah, the marketing of this event is whatever it is, but the actual event means that we get people to invest.
That's not going to help. I agree. I mean, it's like, okay, you can get money, but it's not smart money and it's not the money that big pharma follows. I'm just talking about if you want to market to big pharma, having rich people who don't know anything about drug development invest doesn't help you at all. If you get, the Fidelities and the Arches and the Atlases and all those people to believe you actually have a drug development path that makes sense, the Novartises of the world see that as validation, but we're not getting that. And it's a different story, Nir. I get it's exciting to have rich people want to give you money, but that's not going to help our marketing for big pharma if that was the question. But I don't know, maybe that's just.
So I think there's a bridge here. So first of all, I think Joan, 100% right. Proof is in the pudding, right? The way to validate the field is clinical results. That rightly so, right? Because if we can't ultimately get to clinical results, then in fact we should be revising our own hypotheses, right? I think a lot of us have strong hypotheses based on all the data we've seen, but ultimately, we're all scientists, right? And as is pharma, as is the FDA and other regulatory agencies, and that is the right threshold, right? Are we actually able to modulate disease in a meaningful way? So there is a little bit of how do you want to get there? There are legitimate concerns for, I think, us as a field to be careful about, right? I think there's been a kind of a history of some fringe elements that of course you need to be careful about, that you're conflating the fringe approach versus the scientific approach. There are legitimate concerns around equity and environment and so on, which as a field we need take seriously. I believe they can all be addressed. I actually think there's lots of benefits, and we can do this in a way that is equitable. So those are legitimate concerns that we should think through. And then in terms of where the funding sources come from, there ultimately will be a role for VC, and a lot of the players you mentioned. That they're on a longer time frame than typically pharma is, but they're still on a relatively short time frame where there's a dollar ROI that they can see that comes out of it. And so if you go even further upstream of that, there is a role for what I'll call venture philanthropy, which is folks who are looking to make a return, but maybe a return below cost of capital, because they're also trying to advance the field. And for whatever, right, they believe in the field, they have a human health interest, for whatever reason. And I think those folks who are willing to invest at a stage before you can kind of make the pure financial argument can be helpful to progress the field. And there is an element of obviously making sure that that's smart money, that it's done, with people who understand healthcare and biology. But I wouldn't say that you want to exclude that entirely, right? It's
I
a part
agree.
of the path.
But where is the blue chip? There is, I mean, I almost think it didn't occur to me till you guys were talking. Not only is there no big pharma money, there's almost no blue chip investors investing who validate this for big pharma and for other investors. And why aren't we getting any blue chip investors in? They were in briefly RestorBio and briefly into the Senescent Unity.
Unity, yeah.
Right.
But they haven't been in anything else.
I really think it's just a timing.
Ones.
It's timing.
But
I think we're at the stage now where we're at venture philanthropy. I think in a couple of years we're going to see more VC activity, and then in a couple of years you see more pharma activity. I really think.
Yeah.
Things have changed. The field's moving now, right? There's quite a lot of investment and interest coming in, and that path should emerge.
And some of the investors in this meeting have gone to Cambrian, James know that. Some of them went, I thought, Life Bioscience, and I think Fiona has some. The only person I didn't send to anyone was Sackler, who was there. Okay, I didn't send him to anything, but there are investors who are going to put money in the LBA membership. So I understand your point about marketing, but you cannot get to phase 3 trial if you don't have the money, right? So
I agree, but we should be able, I think the science has progressed. There's plenty of VCs who invest in early stage, exciting, compelling stories. Somehow we shouldn't, I don't think we're at the stage anymore where all of us should only be dependent on venture philanthropy. We ought to be able to market this to blue chip. There's so much potential. The science is there. It's exciting, but somehow we're missing. I don't quite know why. Maybe I think some of it is there's a fringe element attached to this, and the more crazy stuff they read, the more they don't understand this is actually really rigorous science beyond crazy people sitting and getting hypoxic on a floor in Switzerland. I don't know. I may be wrong on this, but.
Eric.
Yeah,
Eric, you've lived this. Curious your thoughts.
I don't fully agree with the analysis in a way that I think one thing to remember is that we are a nascent field. So with zero drug in the market and zero success, clinical success. So in some way, it is quite early, and we all, even though many of us have been in this for 25 years, we all recognize these are early days. And actually we've had more failures than we've had success because we've had zero success. So, and I think it's always good to remember this. The second thing is there is a part of the community that wants to essentially disrupt. And so we can't have it. You can't have our cake and eat it. If we want to be total disruptors, we have to expect that the establishment is going to resist. And I would say some of the knee-jerk reaction that we're seeing is by the statement that some people in our field, and obviously some of them fringe, are making about the fact that the healthcare is failing and pharma is the problem and so on. So that's one aspect. So I think for me, there's a way to proceed, which is a bit more accommodating and working with the powers that be and trying to fit into their existing model, which is a disease model. And that's actually, when we look at all the companies that are raising funds right now, they're all doing this in the same manner. They are targeting not aging as a disease, but they're targeting specific aging associated disease. So as far as I'm concerned, I think this is probably the smartest way to get into this mainstream world. The last point is I disagree a little bit with you, Joan, in the way that there are serious biotech companies that are raising money from serious people. I'll just give you an example. BioAge right now is doing incredibly well, and all of their money comes from mainstream biotech people.
It's tech, actually. Like, is it Andreessen? They're not the biotech blue chips that are in.
Yeah.
It's
No, but
different.
look also at AbbVie. I mean, has invested $1 billion with Calico. If that's
Calico,
not an endorsement, of the science of aging, I don't know what it is. So there are, a number of, look who GSK hired as the head of its research with someone who comes straight out of the aging research, Hal Barron. So there's. I think there are hints of an interest in the field, and I think we just have to propose really solid research, solid clinical trials, not necessarily that are disrupting and throwing everything that's been accomplished so far, but maybe working with the system and the establishment until we can prove the validity of what we're doing. Then I think that the gates will open. That would be my prediction.
Well, just having worked again with a lot of these blue chip guys at RestorBio, they won't invest if you have a lot of rich investors with a lot of equity, because they want control of the decisions and to respect the board members who are making these decisions. So I do think there is a knowledge that we sort of need to understand about how they work. And I really think they're important for our field to get some of them to bite. And I think they'll only bite based on data. But I think sometimes we shoot ourselves in the foot by building everything based on rich people who tend to invest because the only thing they can't control in their life is their health and lifespan. And so that's a panic for them. I get it. I get why they want to invest, but it doesn't necessarily provide the foundation for very long that we're going to need to get the credibility. And that's
like
Fiona.
As an investor, what I'm struggling with, I see the science, and I see that every single one of our investments has a path to market through the FDA, approval of some disease or multiple diseases. But the value is really much higher than that disease they're going after. The value is this tremendous new market where every one of us over 40 is a customer. And that is being lost right now because we are going after disease. And to Eric's point, we really don't have the data for turning back the clock yet, right?
Yeah, we don't have a success. John, type 1 diabetes, Alzheimer's, every disease is moved by personal stories of people. You cannot deny people their wish to have health span, right?
Yeah, we just need smart investors. I agree. I mean, it's not that the stories aren't good and the people investing aren't good. It's that we're missing the kind of traditional foundation. And I agree, maybe we have to be more flexible and traditional stuff should be disrupted and thrown out the window. But I think the point of this thing was, how do we get to big pharma? I think big pharma would also see some validation in smart investors investing. And Jerry, you're a big pharma guy too. I don't know what you.
No, I agree. You have to walk with sort of your customer a little bit first before you sway them to your side. And so I think, and this is about the LBA, Longevity Biotechnology Association, and how do we best position? I think it's going to have to come down to highlighting those companies as a group that are elevating the science and advancing the science, right? These investors look for incremental de-risking to apply more capital. And so we have to treat it in that methodical fashion. And I think at times we jump to the end and there's a big chasm between where their comfort zone is versus our messaging. So I think that's important. That's something we talked about in one of the initial meetings last April was, who belongs in the Longevity Biotechnology Association. And to the extent we want to achieve the long-term goal of mainstream with both biotech investors and pharma, we need to hold a high level standard and then market those that are delivering on that promise incrementally, right? So it's just taking down the fences of risk along the way. And that's just how I've always looked at it. And I mean, that's how we're trying to apply it here, is trying rigor and discipline and stepwise fashion of de-risking our assets along the way, and that's how they operate, and that's how pharma operates. You know, you have to get to a certain level of de-risk, and then it becomes an attractive asset at a certain valuation, right? So I think that's important for us to consider of how we position ourselves, because I was also at that Longevity Investors Conference, and it was a phenomenal conference. But I think what you're hearing from Joan wasn't there. That was probably 3% of the meeting, right?
That's what got marketed, right?
But for the press who go, that is the sensationalism, right? They know that gets eyeballs. And it's almost a shame that sometimes, you know, the baby gets thrown out with the bathwater because of that. But there was some phenomenal science. Your presentation was remarkable, right? There was others like that were akin to what we want to be, and sometimes on the fringe that dominates the story, unfortunately.
And
there
John,
are
I do
people in
think
the fringe. Go ahead, Michael.
yeah. So there are indications already of some blue chip engagement, right? So Robert Nelson's on the board of Altos from Arch. You mentioned Arch, right? Kevin Bitterman from David's lab is at Atlas. Atlas invests in Navitor, which is an Intor company, right? So it's not, that's an example. Flagship Pioneering has an interest in preventative medicine for sure. And so I think you're correct that, go back in time, like Polaris had invested in the space, right? There's also some history to remember, right? I think they're on the cusp, and I think data drives decisions, and that it's just incumbent on us as a group to run the trials and do the work that shows the data.
Yeah.
And to speak to them in that's the message that resonates, is we are generating the placebo-controlled, well-powered data that is going to give those incremental milestone increases in valuation and get rid of all that hypey stuff. That will resonate, is my guess, with both big pharma and the blue chip investors. And I think, Eric, your point is really good. There's been failures, but I remember talking to the guy who founded Vertex, and he said how Vertex won is resilience. We failed and we failed and we failed and we failed and we failed. And you just have to always have a backup plan and go again and go again and go again, and you will hit. But you have to have, part of drug development is there's a lot of attrition and failure. So as a field, we have to not go to all the investors going, oh my God, we had a trial that failed. Well, welcome to drug development. But we learn and we iterate and we go forward and do better. And we'll hit.
Michael, final thoughts.
So again, thank you. First of all, I love this group, right? It's like, it's great to be on the call and just see all the, faces of folks that I really respect. And it was a great conversation. So happy to join more of these as helpful. And special thanks, Lisa and Nir, for inviting.
We are looking for your leadership and advice, and thanks for everything you're doing, and thanks for the discussion. To everybody else, I'll see you soon.
Yes, thank you, everybody. And I took a lot of notes, because a lot of what we discussed was the role that the LBA should play. So I look forward to connecting with each of you individual to brainstorm some more. Thanks so much.
Good to see you all.
Bye. See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.